So, Kate, we're just happy to have you today to talk about your huge accomplishment. And it looks like you had a really good supportive network to get you through this. So that's what it appears to me this morning. But Kate's going to share with us the trials and tribulations and excitements of completing her dissertation research, and then what is next for her. So Kate, I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay, thank you. To Deanna's point, really one of my biggest takeaways, excuse me, is that it really takes a community to help somebody through a learning experience. And I didn't recognize how important that was or how much space people were creating for me until I was finished. And I had a huge void of space, and I went, oh man, I'm gonna have to talk about something else for a little while. So a lot of those people who helped hold that space are on this call. My cousin Judy is on, my family, Betty Downs, Ray Foster, are all people that just kind of nudged me along consistently. And, you know, I especially want to call out Ray Foster, who is the person who, and Kathy Joseph, both who really pushed me into this work. And Ray, a longtime mentor who's just really helped me to cultivate my questions and my learning experience. So I really appreciate them. So we have Matthew Claps on also, and Lori Ellington. Lori's a current Saybrook student in mind body medicine. So I want to also welcome her to her future, as well as for Marty. You guys will be doing this at some point. So I'm going to go ahead and start the PowerPoint presentation. And I am fine if you want to ask me questions along the way, or if you want to wait till the end, that's fine also. And I'm going to go ahead.
And I just put a note in the chat box. If you will, put your thoughts, your comments, anything you think of, and then also your questions there. But like she said, you're free to answer, ask questions as we go.
You'll be able to hear me. And Marianne Shaney's on also. How fun. And Michael Rubel's another person that helped me to catch some big edits. So did my mom. And if any of you want to hear a joke, I'll tell you about a massive edit that I had about transformative learning. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Otherwise, I'll be here trying to chat with everybody who's on. Let's do this. Not let me share. Oops.
Just saw Kendra joined us. Welcome, Kendra.
Hi.
Morning, Kendra.
I'm so excited this worked out.
So the purpose of my dissertation research, and really the reason for me going back to school, was to explore the influence of quality service review on transformative learning and change, specific to child protection agencies. I did look at human service organizations as the broader bounded system for review or for data collection. The foundational theory really started with Peter Senge and his 5 disciplines of a learning organization. And, you know, Senge's belief that it is an intrinsic human desire and need to learn that then enables the development of a learning organization, and that the learning organization is a collective of the learning and the personal growth of those who are in the organization. And he really pushed towards, especially towards the end of his career, that, or now, he's not yet at the end of his career, that a learning organization is not a thing that you actually achieve. It's this generative, continuous being, in the sense, really true sense of systems, soft systems thinking. And the 5 disciplines, mental models, shared vision, team learning, personal mastery, and systems thinking, really help to shape the question and the data analysis for this dissertation. Transformative learning was also the base theory for framing this research. It's a deep structural shift in the basic premise of thought, feelings, and actions. And it requires a catalyst or a challenge, kind of a shock to somebody's thinking, their personal experience, that leads to self-examination about their assumptions and beliefs. And I have been interested in looking at the assumptions and beliefs of caseworkers or permanency workers in child protection and how that might influence their work with families. And I really believed that QSR was a way to get at that, to get at assumptions and beliefs. So the 10 phases of transformative learning are listed here. This list helped to frame my understanding and meaning making of the data as it came in. And it's based on Jack Mezirow's work. A couple of other authors and theorists who I relied on heavily. Parks DeLoz, who's also very connected to Jack Mezirow and his transformative learning. They were able to really make concrete what the actions are that let you know that transformative learning is occurring, and then also how to recreate or to create conditions for transformative learning. And then Chris Argyris's work around single and double loop learning really fascinates me, especially in the context of an organization. And that has to do with, what happens when a person or an organization recognizes that their espoused values differ from their actions, and what they do when that happens, and how they balance the need to save face. Research questions: how can quality service review influence organizational change and transformative learning and change in human service organizations? With 2 sub-questions: how can QSR be used as a learning mechanism to improve practice in child protection? And in what ways can QSR support organizational culture change in child protection agencies? I'd really like to be able to generalize that to other human service organizations. So I designed a qualitative multiple case study method because multiple case study really was the best way to approach the question. I was interested in really discerning how one organization might use QSR versus another, and to learn from not only how they were using it, but what results the organization as well. Data was collected from 3 sources: existing public court monitor reports and any public data pertaining to QSR. This first one was really a way for me to mitigate some of my personal bias and researcher bias towards the topic, which took up about 2 or 3 pages in my dissertation, was just talking about my bias. I conducted interviews with participants using both structured and semi-structured questions. So there was a generative inquiry process. And I observed quite a number of QSR activities, some that are standard or set for the QSR process, and then one that emerged as a process that one of the data collection sites has adapted or used as they have utilized QSR more for learning. Data was collected in person and via Zoom. The 2 data sites were approached and selected based on similar characteristics and attributes, meaning their location nationally, the type of people that they serve, the type of organization. Both were in a court-ordered change initiative to use QSR. excuse me, and then I was generously allowed to come in person and observe their processes and collect data and kind of tag along, which proved to me to be more challenging than I thought, because I was just excited to be at 2 different sites with people who really love the process as much as I do. Okay. So for data analysis, I then came back with all the data, started revisiting the notes I had taken and the recordings. I started coding and tracking 4 themes as they started to emerge. And then through a deductive, interpretive, direct content analysis, I was able to kind of hone in on what the key patterns were that were presenting that really showed conditions for transformative learning and how to use QSR for that purpose. And I have a visual here to show you the data analysis spiral that helped me to organize and frame the data collection and analysis. And my sister-in-law was a huge help in just giving me the language and the understanding for this portion of my dissertation. So some of the key findings, probably to not many people's surprise, but I'm going to call it out. Leaders and actions of leaders were the strongest finding. It surfaced really quickly. It surfaced in many different ways, both as here's what you should do, here's what leaders shouldn't do, and then also in the influence and effect that leader behaviors had on the quality service review department within the 2 organizations. So actions taken by leaders were noted by all participants as the key factor for creating conditions for learning and change. So it really was the commitment and the support for QSR in general, and then specifically for learning and change, consistent actions across or amongst leaders in an organization about QSR, and then that actions of leaders directly influenced that of the QSR team. And I had one participant in particular who was able to describe exactly when the message changed, how it felt for them in doing QSRs, and how it changed the way that they conducted the reviews. Additionally, regarding leaders' actions, it's their empowering of others to really be able to take QSR findings immediately and explore solutions to problems to determine what are the best next steps, and then to close the loop around those actions so that then they can come back and say, did this work or did it not work, and close that learning loop. And then empowering employees to, at all levels, to make changes right away, so they didn't have to, run it up the hierarchy to be able to then make the changes. So one of the things that emerged during data collection that I completely geeked out on, I got so excited because it happened organically, and this same example came up organically, unprompted, in both of the data collection sites. And there was a case illustration or an example used about engaging fathers in child protection proceedings and child welfare practice. And so I really got excited about this because in one context, the data about engagement of fathers and what they did with it next was different than the other site. By something that's a little bit idiosyncratic and specific, but it was like the key that would make the difference for learning, transformative learning and change. So 6 of Mezirow's steps were confirmed or identified during this case illustration. So when I went to start really organizing the data and analyzing it and then reporting out on it, I decided to have a table demonstration with the help of my dissertation committee, who suggested that I use a lot of tables to convey what I was trying to say. you can see where each agency findings supported the data or the data points or the data findings. And both agencies were also using QSR along with a quality improvement plan or a CQI process that really then strengthened the learning, strengthened the iterative process of going back to how do we know, what do we know, what are we doing with it. The study also confirmed the conditions and actions for transformative learning. So, these 5 different points from Parks to Laws were confirmed. Reducing power differential was a big one. That's where I really noticed that actions of leaders make a big difference there. And the reducing power differential was between leaders and QSR staff and frontline staff. And yes, not necessarily between caseworkers and families, although I did address that in the literature review. And then the single loop and double loop learning was the key difference between the 2 agencies and how they used the fatherhood case illustration. So one agency really engaged in single loop learning, where some of it was about addressing the espoused values and recognizing where individual action and behavior needed to change and what they were going to do about it. The other agency took some really strong actions to change the way they were engaging with fathers, but it just wasn't at this level of looking at the assumptions and beliefs of caseworkers in order to do so. That was a really exciting piece. That was a really exciting finding for me. And I didn't know I would be that excited. So a couple of the steps of transformative learning that were, oops, I'm gonna pass that up actually, because it's got identifiers in there. Sorry about that. So if you go into the dissertation, you'll be able to see that one of the agencies that really dug into the 10 levels of, or 6 of the 10 levels of Mezirow's transformative learning, I have descriptors in there of how they did that and what they did with it. The other agency just took a different route. And now I feel like I can go to them and say, and to other agencies or other folks using QSR and say, here's what you need to do. Here's how to do that. Here's how to create the conditions for transformative learning if that's how you decide to use QSR. And here then is this other example of change in their practice, but it's just at a different level. Both agencies reported using QSR to measure practice with specific to engaging fathers, and then recognizing that they had low scores and needed to change what they were doing and how they were doing it. Each had a different set of actions, went back, used QSR to then measure their practice with fathers, and both reported showing improvement in their scores for engaging fathers in components of practice. So this slide will show you, how each of the 2 agencies aligned with the theories and then supported the theories. So the real key findings are around the QSR's influence on conditions for transformative learning. It provides a forum and structure for reflection, dialogue, and exploration of assumptions and beliefs. I have to say it's really feels weird to be talking to a group of you who are such strong supporters of QSR and then to be telling you things that I know you already know. But it was really, has been fulfilling to be able to state this with some confidence behind it, that I can really point to data points and research and formulation and the rigor of research to then kind of validate this. QSR provides opportunity for leaders to empower and support staff to engage in problem solving and identification of solutions. When applied to an existing model for organizational culture or change, QSR can become a triggering event or a supporting structure to then reinforce transformative learning as an organizational process. And then coupled with other organizational structures such as continuous improvement plans, continuous quality improvement processes, it really strengthens learning as a value and a process in organizations. And then when facilitated in a particular way and with a particular intention, QSR can lead to uncovering of assumptions and beliefs as potential barriers to strong practice. So I think that throughout the QSR process, as reviewers, we start to uncover those things. And in one of the sites in particular, they really structured their process to get to this. And then we're like, wow, okay, there it is. What are we going to do right now? You know, knowing that there's a difference in the values of the organization and the values and experiences of caseworkers. How do we handle that? It's a really vulnerable and tender place to be as an organization. So some of the parts of the QSR framework that can be used to create conditions for transformative learning. Practice model, CSSP talks about this all the time, how important it is to have a practice model that defines and prescribes the values of the agency and the expectations for doing the work. What QSR does then is operationalizes and measures adherence to the practice model. It provides intentional reflection at different levels, particularly around mental models and frames of reference. I think it can also get deeper to the value base of the organization, but also the members of the organization. QSR relies on dialogue and inquiry about assumptions and beliefs and about what are we doing each day to help people who the framework for QSR also provides a structure for feedback that addresses the need for corrections, especially around assumptions and beliefs. And it creates a safe space for caseworkers to be vulnerable. I think it provides a really nice structure for, you know, anybody who's in that space to support each other. I then applied a model that Nancy Southern has created and adapted over time that really helps me to be able to describe how you could use QSR for transformation. And you can see in this illustration how there's an event, maybe it's a class action lawsuit, maybe it's the death of a client or a person who's in services, maybe it's just something that you overhear, a caseworker overhears in the lunchroom that kind of sparks, okay, something maybe doesn't feel right about how I choose to exist and how we're actually doing the work. And then you can see that with the supporting structures of the organization, you know, it can reinforce that experience in different ways as an upward spiral or a digressing spiral to either support that and make meaning to what the caseworker might be experiencing and if it fits. Supporting structures also show up as policies, the way people do the work and how the organization then supports it. That's why it can be really hard to have change in organizations if your event is not strong enough to thump the system. There are patterns of action that are less visible, but some of us who are really very relational and have that keen skill to observe the actions of others can start to see, you know, how people in an organization are communicating, how they're interacting, how they're making decisions, how they, for example, talk to parents, how they talk to fathers. That starts to tell us a lot more about what's really going on in the organization. How do people really feel? Which can give us some light and understanding into the beliefs and assumptions of folks in who are working with families or who are in an organization. And I really think that QSR in this structure or in this context can provide a framework to help guide through each of these different levels. And then tell us what to do next as we go back up the other side. How do we start to change our behaviors? How do we build the supporting structures so that we have these strong events? Our supporting structures actually support new behaviors. Okay. That's it. In good Kate fashion, I'm really fast.
It's good, Kate. Thank you. So, whoops, sorry, my computer just fell off its stand. So who wants to ask some questions? And just take yourself off on mute, and we're going to let you jump in. We'll make this a free-for-all.
So I'm going to start. Hey, Kate.
Hey.
Yay! So I had two questions, but I think you answered one of them. And it was really, what was the overall, like the overarching theme that you took away that you're saying, yes, this works for QSR, but I can also see where it would work in other systems?
Well, I think there is a generalizability. Thank you for your questions. I was like, oh, I feel like I'm getting some prompts, like if I was presenting at a big conference. There is a generalizability to it. I mean, I had to really narrow it so that, I could focus for a research question. But, and that's why I focused on child welfare organizations. They're the toughest organizations to understand. And so I thought if there are places that are using it for transformative learning and change, it can be generalizable because it's really not going to get tougher than working with families who abuse their children. So I was really excited about that because I had been able to see it for a long time. And the takeaway that it does get there. So I was really excited, totally geeked out.
Yeah, I would think so too. I had that thought of how other tools could be created to ensure transformative learning. And in my evaluation work, I always try to create that so there is learning happening because you're increasing awareness with the questions or how you present the questions. So yeah, good job.
Yep. QSR does that. We call it QSR miracle. That happens along the way as we're asking the questions. People start to change, or they come back and they say, oh, I thought about what you said and I've already changed my practice from yesterday.
Right.
Well, I just wanted to jump in and sort of add to the conversation that transformative learning can happen in so many different ways too, which makes it hard in some ways to figure out how do you create the conditions for it. But I've started and I'm still so not through my analysis yet, but I'm starting to really question some of Mezirow's premises, particularly around the idea that people have to become very uncomfortable. And part of the reason I was thinking about that, and I'm going back to the dialogues, that one that I participated in, the other that I facilitated, is that, part of what, and I'm sure you were doing this, Kate, part of what you're trying to do is to create safe space where people are comfortable enough to be willing to be vulnerable. So in some ways, that whole idea of becoming uncomfortable sort of goes against that. And I don't have anything yet to really go to. It's just all these questions are starting to come up in my mind, like, well, does it really have to be like that? I mean, that was a question that kept coming to my mind. Does it really have to be like that? So, and of course, there is, I think even Mezirow admits that there are, you can have the sort of the disorienting dilemma, which is boom, this one-time event or piece of information. But there's also the way of just sort of the as he calls it, the accretion of changes in meaning schemes. In other words, these small pieces of information and events that sort of collect to a point where then you go, oh, and perspective transformation happens. So yeah, it's just that whole idea of the discomfort. And I also, the other question I have around that is it related to adult development level? Like people who are at Gibbons' highest level, transforming self, or the self-transforming mind, whatever it is. Because they're able to step in and out of their frame, and they're the only ones who can. I don't think people at that level get uncomfortable. They get curious. So
that's what I really find that QSR does as a framework, and especially as it's applied continuously. But, you know, there is that risk, especially with a court-driven, lawsuit-driven change. And so one of the components that happens in QSR that I didn't go into at all is, you know, what kind of reviewers you have, who's chosen,
oops.
a big training for, you know, context and for building the same base of understanding. But then when we choose reviewers, there's a lot of training that goes into, you know, who's the best reviewer, who's the best match for this, how do we train them up? Because it is a very different approach than what many folks are used to. And we're constantly creating a safe space and building that expectation that you're safe here, we're in this together, I just have a different role, but I really want the same outcome that you do. And so for me, I'm really finding how committed I am to what happens at the front line and what happens between a worker and a family. And because I think it's the most intimate space you can be in, is to talk about a family, about how did we get to this point where your child got harmed, and how did we get here, and what's happening, and how can I help you in a system that tends to be very punitive and top down and linear and concrete in this very human system, you know. So I've gotten really interested in that relationship space and how to create vulnerability that's just enough discomfort that learning can occur, but not so much that we're threatened at our core to save face.
I think Kendra has a question, if I'm reading her nonverbal right.
Yeah, I had, you actually reached my one thought or question, and I'm sorry about my dog. But what I was curious about is that it sounded like there was a delicate balance between the need for safety, as Marty emphasizes, but also the need for just enough discomfort that people were willing to, within the container of safety, to recognize and reflect on dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
So like the balance between not being confronted, which is counterproductive, but being safe enough. Because I think you both have, I mean, sorry.
It's okay.
She's 8 months old. She loves me. Just a second.
But I'll keep, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I had that thought too, because I know the differences between your two groups. And was that a safety issue? Like what Kendra was, do you think that was a safety issue within the group of how they both responded?
I think it was down to the culture of the organization and how willing they each were they were developmentally to be able to look very deep at how are we doing this and what level of safety do we have. And in one of them, you know, they were able to state very clearly, we were getting a message that, oh, this is kind of something we're going through. And then they had a new leader who said, no, this is really important, and we're diving in. And that how that empowered then, you know, rippled out and empowered the other staff to dig in also. And that, you know, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just so then it almost seems to Marty's point again, is that like you had one organization where they were able to reflect on the dissonances and go through that process, and the other agency might have needed a different kind of strategy to nudge them, or like that sensitivity. It's like different pathways to get to the same, but one is more ready than the other. therefore in the one that's not really ready, the like Marty's strategy would be important. Can I go to my question? Okay,
Yeah.
My question is, have you looked at retention of change now after that process? Like which one was stickier?
Ooh, that's a great question. And I think that our folks at CSSP and Matt are probably asking that question all the time of how do we then get to a point where we can leverage some change to a point that it's then sustainable. And that's, so I'm curious about that too. That's where I think that if QSR becomes a supporting structure and a reinforcing process to the positive, not to the status quo, or then becomes a status quo that's strong enough that it can keep like evolving the organization and the people in it. But that is especially in court-driven change, we're really trying to find out what does it take to not only make the change, but get it to stick for long enough that we can change behaviors.
Next question, comment. Matt, anything from you that you want to share along that? I don't know you.
Call it out.
I can see that. Or anybody from CSSP. So I think that would be a good information for Kate.
Well, thanks, Kate. First off, congratulations, Dr. Gibbons. It's absolutely great to see you, and great to see some friends and colleagues here that we've all crossed paths with before. That's a great question. I was actually kind of mulling around that as you were talking, and it's the question around how do you isolate the impact of the QSR when often it's occurring amidst a variety of other system change initiatives. And I don't know the answer to that. So, I mean, from a program leadership perspective, like in my role, the way I talk about it is, can I just get all the arrows pointed in the same direction? Can I just get all the people pulling in the same way? Mm-hmm. I think that helps in terms of sustainability. And I think there's a variety of strategies there. I'm a big fan of the implementation science research, and so I try to apply that in the day-to-day work, which I think are a set of concepts that are put in place in the context of where you're working. From a dollars and cents perspective, because I get asked that question too, like, wow, QSR is a significant investment. And I don't know how to answer that other than, from a value perspective, that I think the juice is worth the squeeze.
We're all throwing in our favorite raisins.
Yeah, we are. So anyway, I don't know, Deanna, if that gets to your question.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, anytime.
And Matt, I did reference implementation science as an argument for QSR, also the ARC model out of the University of Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
Great. Any other questions?
Other frameworks.
Yeah.
Okay, Betty Downs has got a question too.
I just want to jump in here because Kate's done a long, and Ray Foster, a long experience in Mexico, where it was not, the application of QSR was not driven by the courts. And the premise was not mandatory. And the premise was driven by adoption of an approach driven by excellence. It does have its flat sides of stickiness. And what I think I've asked Kate and Ray to help in New Mexico a lot about, and Jennifer is from New Mexico too, is how do you take that early investment that you were talking about, Matthew, that does cost time and energy, and then convert it into a way of doing your practice all along? And I think that's still a challenge. And somewhere when Kate was talking about culture, and I think one of the things that we want to pay more attention to is how do you build a capacity for reflection? Because I think reflection is a pivotal element in you going down to the basic assumptions and really starting to get at what's driving the practice in the wrong way. So I do think it's an ongoing challenge when you're not driven by mandate.
It really is. It's different. It's very different. How do you get them you know, the pressure to make the change is a different pace, I think. Can be.
Kate, Lori, I'm going to call on you because you've had such great comments in the chat box. Do you want to summarize those or ask Kate a question or?
Yeah, hey there. Yeah, I've actually tried to talk a couple of times and I was on mute, so I was just kind of like whistling in the wind over here. I'm just kind of happy to hear other people. And Kate, I'm so excited. What a beautiful contribution to the field. It's such good work. So happy to see this come to fruition. So a couple of things I'm thinking, I just really love hearing people talk about this like balance, kind of like seesaw between a threat state and psychological safety, and really overlapping with some of the research that we see like from Gallup with engagement in the workplace. And it made me wonder if, you know, the folks, the selected reviewers, if they're that 15% of the population, you know, that are engaged. And that's who we get. And then, you know, they're kind of up against the 85% that are disengaged in the organization. But also thinking about self-determination theory, which is, you know, the most well-researched theory for human motivation, and how that might play into people, you know, really getting engaged and on board and feeling safe enough to be curious and attracted to this type of work. And then how, I mean, when you think about the learning loop, Kate, the feedback loop, you evaluated the tool, so you're part of it. So, and of course, I know you're still probably trying to catch your breath from finishing this, but I'm really interested in what the next steps are for disseminating and integrating this wonderful learning into the work, because it's like you're just part of that loop. And so how's that going to get in there to the leaders to understand that they need to be thinking about self-determination theory, growth mindset, transformative learning, and how to create these cultures of safety to move the practice forward. So that was a lot. But whatever you want to respond to.
That was great, Lori. Thank you. So Kate, what are you going to do?
Oh, wait, go ahead.
I just said, what are you going to do?
Oh, so some of the next steps is I have, you know, asked Ray, longtime mentor and, you know, the creator of QSR, to co-author with me some of the key components of this findings, but also what is the QSR model for change? Like, if we explicitly stated, here's how to use it. I know that CSSP is interested in that also. I am interested in connecting with one or both of the agencies in the in the study to get more descriptive about how they've used it and what they've done since, to really get to the assumptions and beliefs. Like, how did they hold really dear this fragile point when caseworkers said, you know, I didn't grow up with a dad and we're doing fine. So, you know, these other families will be fine without the dads present. I mean, that's a really core experience that impacts practice and the trajectory of permanency for families. And I have really learned some new personal and professional ways to use quality service review. I note this in the dissertation that I was astounded at the level of professionalism that the QSR reviewers convey during reviews. It's just inspiring, palpable how much respect they have for the frontline staff. And so I aim to hold that and convey it forward also. You know, I don't think I've ever been disrespectful really, but that there's a deep sense of value in holding the respect and not criticizing how people do the work, but just creating this container for vulnerability, that we're all trying to do the same thing. I'm just doing it from a different, you know, point of view. And I've been thinking, you know, to Betty's statements, because, you know, and the work that I'm doing in Hawaii right now is all on a voluntary basis. And so what is the approach when it's chosen and opted versus, you know, leveraged by a class action lawsuit? They're different approaches. And Betty knows we've struggled to really land it, Jen too, land it deep enough into that agency to keep it going. yeah, it's ongoing. And I see it as, I'm part of the systems. Can't be separate. Leaders are not separate. So, but first, what I've been doing is reading fiction. That's the first thing you do after you're finished. Take a deep breath.
That's right. Who else has a question?
Yeah. Oh,
wow.
Judy, how can we use it in corporate? Ooh. We can talk to you about that. The reflection process. Mm-hmm. Yep, it's what coaches try to do. But it's personal development. It really is personnel development.
Yeah. Hi, this is Ray. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Ray.
Hey, Ray.
Hey, good to hear all of your voices and see so many friends and colleagues from times past and times present joining Kate for this important life event for her. But just a couple of thoughts along the way, and listening to what you examined and learned along the way, I think it's a good reminder that the people who make a difference in terms of how all of this goes are the incumbent leaders in the organizations where this finds its way into some level of activity. In a sense, QSR is a strategic tool for leadership, and it exists, it thrives, it's used as long as leaders there commit to learn and to act on what is learned along the way. And having seen large-scale system changes over the years that went on in time for a decade, one of the keys is the stability of the leader and the willingness of the leader to learn and lead from the discoveries made at different levels, at the front line level, at the supervision level, at the agency level, community level, in terms of what new information the QSR produces. And the people who have been most effective in system change are the ones who work together with their supervisors, their frontline practitioners, their trainers, their consultants, their partners in practice to make a difference. Because it turns out change comes at different levels and at different ways. But the people who had the most powerful results understood that, tapped into it, learned from it, and led using what was done, always keeping a mind and an eye on what happens at the front line. The key transaction points are the things that make all the difference. And in the end, you talked about motivation. Certainly, fear is motivation. Curiosity is motivation. High aspiration is motivation. Commitment to making a difference for people over a long period of time is motivation. And so I think motivation comes in different forms and in different times for different folks. But as long as you have a leader who owns it and uses it, QSR tends to sustain in organizations, and organizations that use QSR tend to do better over time. When leaders change and priorities change, that's a critical time for QSR of whether it will sustain over time and move forward, or whether new leaders will bring new ideas and move in new directions. Having seen this unfold in both ways over time, I realize in the end, it's really what leaders do and how they embrace and use this to get smarter and do better as they go forward. So thank you, Kate.
Thank you for a summation that I could have never made. Not really, but it's good to hear, I hear your voice in my head frequently.
What a scary thought.
And, to also let Ray know, this is in the acknowledgements page in my dissertation, is that what came to mind throughout the whole research process was the wise and gentle teacher, and that really is, so the dissertation is dedicated to the wise and gentle teacher in each of us, and that may we present with that approach when using QSR and trying to create conditions for vulnerability, learning, and change. It's my little homage to Ray. So, okay. Any other questions? I got a lot going on in the chat box, but I'm just so thrilled to see everyone and to have you hear the end result of what I've been blathering about for years, and to see, the final. And this, Deanna, this is such a nice platform for doing that, having a real closure. This feels like a real closure and ending.
Well, we found as we were finishing that, well, my cohort, that there really was no avenue to share. And a lot of people were so tired of their dissertation, they just put it on a shelf and went back to work or whatever. And it was energizing for many people to say, oh yeah, that's what I wanted to do. And let me refocus. So, so it's been beneficial on many aspects. But if anyone knows of anyone that has finished, is finishing, it's from any school, I'll be glad to facilitate. I don't have the time to go out and market it and try to force people to do it, but so I schedule it once a month if there is someone, but just feel free to give my email to anyone, and I'll be glad to facilitate that, because there's lots of good work and information going on in dissertation research, and sometimes it just gets buried. So did somebody have a question? Lori?
Yeah, I'm wondering about publication or submitting, Kate.
Oh my, of course. There is, at first you're like, oh my God, I can't form another sentence. And I was like, QSR, which is something I really love, but I had to get to the point of saturation. And now I'm like, okay, I'm ready to present in different, public platforms, as in conferences, but I am going to really carve out some time to organize around writing. I'd be interested if CSSP wants to co-author, because when I started the Lit Review a couple of years ago, they were the only points of reference that I had that even, I could use as a citation. There's been 1 or 2 articles that have come out since, and I'd really like to contribute it from a qualitative research approach and an organizational change approach, really.
So Kate, Patricia Thompson says she can't, for some reason her audio is not working, but she was hoping that you could talk about the CQI process in QSR and the importance of having a strong CQI process.
Yes, the answer is yes. So for many places, QSR can be a real foundation for the CQI process. It's one way of knowing. It's a contributing piece. It's not the only way. So I would really encourage any organization to take, that's human service based, to take a case-based review methodology approach as a complement or as a way of knowing. Compliance data, audit-based data, process data, those are all very important. And to really build that fuller, richer picture, I think a qualitative case-based review process like quality service review adds to it, and then conveys or illustrates the importance of a learning process. That learning is not just checking the boxes and did we do something, it's how did we do it and how were we feeling and what were we experiencing as caseworkers, while we were doing the work. How you present, what's emerging in you, what's bubbling up, what's your own growth. All of that is really good information for organizations to have.
And Patricia, you may be able to talk now. It looked like you were muted, and I unmuted you.
Oh.
So sorry, I should have checked that first, but.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. I wondered what happened. Thanks a lot, Kate, for that reference. I think just talking about how do you continue this great work and how do you influence systems that maybe are no longer have that quintessential event and now are really interested in improvement, but are also but may not have leaders that have bought into a QSR process or a case-based review because of the cost. You know, how do you manage that, and how do you encourage that case-based review? To say that it's really important to have this component in a larger CQI process. Okay.
Yep. I know my folks at CSSP, Gail Samuels, have strong feelings about that. They're trying to make it happen all the time, and to get larger systems to really see the value in that level of reflection and that structured process. And I think that, again, it comes to Ray's point of what are the motivating factors. If fear is a motivating factor, that has a strong influence. But if you don't actually think that anything's different, or you don't need to change, or we're just going to get through this so we can get through this, the commitment to learning is different. It's not there.
I totally agree. Great work, Kate.
Pat, I think this is your future too. I think you should get onto this platform.
I'm sorry, there's some static here. No, absolutely, we'll talk.
She said, "Oh, I think there's static."
Great. Anybody else with any other questions? We've had a few people to join. Leslie Solomon's on now.
Yeah.
So Leslie, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Kate. I can see you, but I can't see my video going because I'm driving.
So anybody else have a question?
Well, I would just want to state with Leslie's work, I would be really curious about, first of all, to connect her like with a couple of other folks on the call, but then how do we use frontline practice? How do we connect leaders more closely to frontline practice in any organization, whether it's a point of sale or a point of how can I help you in any sense, really? And how leaders what's their willingness to hear when things aren't going well? How do they process that? What do they do with it? How do they use it as a leveraging point for change?
Anything else?
Kate, is that a question you're asking, or
No,
something
it's
to
an
leave us with?
invitation. It's an invitation.
A future invitation.
Future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really thoughtful one.
Okay, well.
I think you have one more person. I think Gail Samuels might be muted as well.
Right, because I can't believe she's been quiet for this whole
Okay,
time.
Gail, I just unmuted you, so go ahead and talk.
Well, Kate, first of all, you know me well. I was trying to talk I tried to talk before Ray. I mean, who tries to talk before Ray? But I did. I was talking to myself the entire time. So I'll just really quickly, because I know we're up against time, say that, first of all, thank you for all the CSSP mentions. There are a lot of QSR fans at CSSP, and we're CQI fans, so we're very committed to supporting both. I think we'd be willing to have you come and talk to some more of our staff. One of the things I'm thinking about as a next step, perhaps, is having you have an audience with maybe a group of leadership. I think, what I was trying to say before Ray said it so eloquently was I was going to ask you to talk more about the role of leaders, and you did that. I think it really helps when, regardless of whether there's a lawsuit or, whatever support that the front line and managers and supervisors can have from leadership to just even do basic CQI is important, but to do, CQI on steroids, which is what the QSR has the potential to be, is such a large commitment. And we've seen leaders make that commitment and leave, and we've seen others come in and revive the commitment. And I think, to your points about the transformative organizations and just, knowing that they're transformative leaders. And, as Ray said, we've seen them really shift practice over many, many years. And I think that might be an area to focus on for you and CSSP is that the communication with leaderships about how organizations function and how to transform them. So again, as everyone else has said, thank you very much, and we'll be in touch.
I think Juanita has a question. Juanita, you're unmuted.
Oh, okay, thank you. It's more like, where do we go, and the implications for staff training, because that's where it happens between the frontline staff and the clients. And I haven't seen much innovation in staff training in how many years I've been a social worker. And as I go out to organizations now, I don't find a lot of excitement. I mean, this training is pretty rote and routine, and they're not getting it in master's programs.
Yeah.
Juanita, this is Gail. Which training are you talking about? Just general training, or
Training for frontline master degree clinicians. It's a box at this training, that training, but how do I see that in practice? And what does what we learn from these reviews have on how staff are trained to do better practice? It's just it's a global question. There's probably no answer, but I haven't seen application toward what do we need to do about training.
Welcome back, Kate. I was worried there for a second. Now you're in the middle of the screen.
Look without putting her eyeball on the camera. My mom is in the background, and she's putting faces and names, voices to people I've talked about and had experience with for 25 years. So she's like, what are you? So I think, Juanita, that's what, so some of what Ray and I have worked on in the past couple of years is building other trainings out of what we've learned from reviews, to build some capabilities in staff, particularly social supervisors, because that's really where that reinforcement will happen. And if supervisors are leading from this model or this framework, then that's where we have the reinforcing of QSR and learning as an internal organizational process.
Great.
Thank you.
I think
so. We've also talked about backing this up to college or to an MSW program, and I think that's right. I think that often there are folks that come into child welfare or other human services systems, and they have some foundation of practice, and when I've seen them through QSR, it seems like there's this light bulb, and oh my gosh, this is what I should be doing, or thank you for that feedback. And I often wonder, it could be the supervisor that should be providing that, but what about before they get to the agency? And I know, Juanita, I've had conversations with you about, what about at the university level? How can people be better prepared for this work? So that is also something to think about.
I mean, I see that as a big area that needs further development if we're going to really make an impact on the outcomes.
Yeah, and I see it too in the work that I do, that leadership has to desire real learning and deep learning, and not just to check the box we've done our yearly or quarterly training, and it's all about their intention.
May I add a thought on training? Here's a couple of thoughts. You can train for awareness and you can train for performance, and they're not the same. Most of the training that we see is training for awareness, and often it's about updates on policies and procedures and access to resources. But training for performance, as it goes to the rudiments of practice, are the things that we see the least of. In QSR, that has been, I think, a frequent finding. But I'll give an example where something we learned through QSR gave rise to training that has grown in its use. One of the things that we discovered some years ago is that the reasoning process by which you move from assessment into goals and plans and strategies and those things were not well developed. And out of that grew a recognized need for better training for clinical reasoning and case formulation as it related to child welfare and behavioral health case practice. And as a result of that, over time, there evolved sort of a little course, a workshop on clinical reasoning and case formulation. And it started in one part of the country and moved to another, to the point now that Betty in New Mexico has supported clinical reasoning case formulation training across the state in multiple agencies. And it has now found its way into master's level courses in 2 universities, one in New Mexico and one in West Texas, focused on master's students in psychology, social work, counseling, and other areas to build, as part of their pre-service effort, clinical reasoning and case formulation into the curriculum, and hopefully build it into the practice of future students who are going to the field. It so happens that Kate is one of the instructors or professors who's doing some of that training. So there is a positive link in moving from what you discover in QSR, moving beyond training for awareness and moving to training for performance, and building that into pre-service as well as ongoing in-service training. So that would be at least one example. But I wish there were many more.
Thank you, Ray. Thanks. Kate, I think, Kendra, do you still have a question? Was there a question in your chat?
Kendra is a perpetual question.
Yes, I am. I was born that way. My questions are sort of out into the future sort of thing. So not directly related to your work in the moment. We could talk about them later. I just wrote them down so I wouldn't forget.
Okay, got it.
But
Thank you.
Yeah.
Who else? Jennifer, did you have a question earlier? I thought I picked up on a, okay, just wanted to make sure you were being heard.
Yeah.
Anybody else? And remember, you have to unmute yourself, and if you can't, you can chat that you need to be unmuted. Okay. All right. So Kate, any final words of thought?
Yes, lots. But I am so honored that each of you are here to share this with me and to hear what my experience has been and the findings, but also to contribute so richly and deeply in a conversation with each other. Like I said earlier, it's like sitting at your wedding and all of these really cool people that I'm the only one who really knows everybody. And I get to see you interacting with each other. And it's really cool. It's very gratifying. I feel really hopeful about how to best use QSR going forward. This process has really helped me to answer some of my nagging questions about quality service review. The Senge's theories on systems thinking really gave me a frame for it. Then there were people who gave me opportunities to test it out. Ray being one, Betty Downs, Jennifer, lots of different places where I could test out my new learnings and my new skills. So I'm just really feel grateful and honored right now to share this time with each of you collectively.
Well, thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this. It was an awesome session. And later today, the recording should be up on my YouTube channel, and I'll send everybody an email with that link in case you want to share it or have other thoughts. So thanks everyone for joining us today. And I know, have a good week out there. The beginning of the week.
Yes. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Congratulations, Kate.
Congratulations.
Hi, Kate.
Congratulations again, Dr. Kate. Yay!
gonna watch each of you get off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bye, Kate.
Bye, Jen. See you
Bye,
soon.
Jen. Benjamin, thank you for joining us and being the
Yes.
first step.
Hey, Ben, you can present your PhD in like 10 years on this platform.
Right, right.
We'll probably do it in 6.
Yeah, probably in 6. And I'll connect you to Kendra to talk about spiral dynamics. She's all, what? Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, I see an R on there. Wait, is that the mysterious Ryan Gibbons?
It is.
Where?
The elusive.
Hey.
Hey, Ryan.
Oh, that's awesome.
Congrats.
Deep voices for teenagers.
No. Hey, hug the moms. I'll call you later. Love you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Congrats.
Bye, Ryan. Ben, thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Are you like listening during class? What are you doing?
No, we actually got out of school because of flooding.
Oh. Flood, snow. Is Mike still on? Yeah, Mike's still on.
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
So Dad's plane got delayed,